Welcome. Last time we were together, we were talking about the Baroque period. We started with the early Baroque opera, talking about Monteverdi, the last great madrigalist, the first great opera composer. He composed the first complete opera in 1607. We compared that to a later opera, one by an Englishman, Henry Purcell, Dido and Aeneas. And then we went over to Italy. Major things happening over in Italy, especially with the music of Corelli and Vivaldi, the Italian instrumental composers. Tonight, we're going to see the two composers who really were the culmination of the Baroque style. J.S. Bach, 1685 to 1750, and George Friedrich Handel, 1685 to 1759. Both born in the same country of Germany, fairly close to each other, born the same year. But boy, these were very different people with different careers. And we will start with the music of J.S. Bach. Certainly marks one of the great high points in Baroque music. Bach came from a long line of musicians. And don't forget, also, we are in Germany, which we are also seeing the German Reformation, right? And so Bach's music is really the music of the German Reformation. We'll talk a lot about his contributions there. Bach came from a long line of musicians. His father and grandfather and great-grandfather were all church organists, musicians, composers, and so many members of the Bach family were musicians. The word Bach actually became synonymous with town musician. Can you guys imagine the hundreds of Bachs at this family reunion? It must have been one great party of incredible music. You're talking about a long line of musicians that, you know, went way back into the 16th century. And so Bach was one of a very long line of very successful musicians. Please remember, as we talk about J.S. Bach, he was not incredibly famous during his lifetime. And he is one of the gods of music. And I won't say that a lot in this course, but I'm saying it now for the first time. He was really one of the gods of music. He changed the face of music. He changed the way people looked at writing music. And so we have to give him a lot of credit, but he didn't get a lot of credit during his lifetime. And it wasn't until a century or so after his death that people realized his contribution. So it's very interesting because we certainly revere him now. Bach himself had 20 children, of which 9 survived, and 4 actually became well-known composers. We'll talk about one of Bach's sons when we talk about the classical period. C.P.E. Bach, or Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach, did a lot for the classical style. So a long line of Bachs were musicians. Bach, of course, probably received his first musical training from where? Well, his family, right? They all learned from each other. His father, his cousin, his grandfather. But unfortunately, when Bach was 9, both of his parents died. And that was very, very unfortunate. And Johann went to live with his oldest brother, who was an organist in a nearby town. And this is where he developed a lot of talent at the organ. And boy, do we have incredible pieces written by Bach specifically for the organ. And he was entranced with the organ. He would walk miles and miles to see organ concerts. I mean, he was very, very entranced with the sound of the organ. And of course, as you know, what does our landscape look like, right? We have these wonderful churches. And of course, we'll also see popping up wonderful instruments as well. When he was 18, Bach received his first position in Arnstadt, Germany. And please know, as we talk about him, I'm not going to say he was the well-traveled musician. I'll talk about Handel that way. He was a robust man of the world, but Johann Sebastian stayed in Germany, and that's where he lived, and that was his life. And so I want to point out, yes, he got a wonderful job in Arnstadt. This is kind of a funny story. When he was in Arnstadt, a town really not far from his birthplace, he came into conflict with church authorities because they felt his music was too complicated. And a lot of people did. it is complicated music. It is music of genius. And you really have to look at this music and listen to this music intelligently to appreciate it. Some of the hardest to do, because you really have to look inside of it. And so the other thing, his music is too complicated on one hand, and he was also cited at an empty church with a strange maiden up in the organ loft. So we see some personality from this guy, because we don't really know a lot about his personality. He was a very pious individual, but when he was 18, he got into a little trouble there. I want to show you basically three places during his life where he worked. He had more posts than that, but I want to talk about three general places in Germany where he worked and the works of art surrounding him and surrounding the place where he worked. Okay, so we'll look at three different cities in Germany where Bach worked. We know certainly this is the German Reformation, so he is a devout Lutheran, right? That is one of Bach's major contributions, was this music of the Reformation. Specifically, we're going to talk about his contribution, and that is the cantata, a choral piece specifically written for those Lutheran services, and he wrote 1,000 of them, you know, a lot. So we'll talk about his, he was a very, very pious and proud to be a pious man. Okay, so where did he stop first? His first really important job where he did a lot of composing was in Weimar, Germany. And he held that post until 1717. I believe he received the job in 1708. So he spent a lot of time there. And he was the concertmaster of the court orchestra, which means he was the lead violinist. And he decided to leave, and this goes to show you also some of his personality. He decided to leave when he was passed over for a promotion. He went to the Duke of Weimar and he said, "Hey, can I have some more money? Can I have a raise? You know?" And the Duke of Weimar said no, and then the Duke of Weimar basically threw him in jail. But all his life, Bach asked for what he wanted. And all his life kept demanding for his rights, and he never feared controversy. So that gives you a little look into his personality a little bit. At the court of Weimar, he composed organ works and cantatas, and we'll talk about the cantata a little bit. Just know now that that is a choral work. But he was supposed to compose a cantata like every 4 weeks. I mean, they really kept him busy. Remember, these musicians and these composers were not big deals. They were high-class servants. And if you were a composer and somebody said to you, "I need a cantata by 5 o'clock," is that okay? Can you imagine that, this kind of forced creativity? Well, about every 4 weeks he had to write a choral work for the church. And so that was very stressful indeed for him. His most prestigious and lucrative position was to come after Weimar, and that was, he was the court conductor for the Prince of Cöthen. C-O-T-H-E-N is pronounced Cöthen, and he remained there until 1723. And it is no shock that this is one of the most productive periods of his life, productive especially in instrumental works. Music for instruments. He directed a small orchestra, and so some of his most famous music was written in this period, and I bet you guys have heard of, I hope, the Brandenburg Concerti. Believe it or not, those are some of our most cherished music from Mr. Bach, and you're shaking your head. Yes, do you know he never heard them played? They never came out of the vault. And again, this is some of his greatest music, which we will be listening to a movement of one of them. Again, most productive period of his life, and a lot of great instrumental music. A lot of 6 cello suites, flute sonatas, violin sonatas, you name it, and he did it. In 1720, Bach's wife died, leaving him with 4 young children. And the next year, at 36, he married a 21-year-old singer at the court of Curtin. And his second marriage, I guess, was just as happy as his first. But I thought at first, oh my God, he waited like less than a year to get married, but he did it. Unfortunately, the Prince of Curtin's interest waned as far as this instrumental music, because I guess he married a woman who didn't like music. And so all of a sudden, the Prince didn't really care. So unfortunately, Bach decided to look for a new job. And the last post of Bach's was in Leipzig. He was the director for St. Thomas Church in Leipzig, Germany. And this was a tremendously stressful job, because he was responsible for an entire municipality. This was St. Thomas Church had many churches. He was responsible for 4 churches. He was the choir director, the orchestra director, and he had to compose a cantata nearly every Sunday or church holiday. I mean, he was working very, very hard. And he composed also a lot of wonderful organ and keyboard works during this time. This position carried less prestige than the one before, but Bach was very interested in Leipzig because it was a large city. It was a city at that time of about 30,000 people, where his children, in his words, could receive a good Lutheran education. And they could also go to Leipzig University, which was a very wonderful university. He conducted and composed compositions for chorus, soloists, and orchestra each Sunday. He was responsible for the musical education of youngsters, and he gave concerts every Friday night at a coffee house. As a matter of fact, he wrote a piece entitled The Coffee Cantata. So he was very social, and it's hard to imagine how he did all of this surrounded by children, relatives, students, and it was just very, very stressful. And this stress took its toll, my friends. During the 1740s, unfortunately, Bach's eyesight deteriorated, yet he continued to conduct and teach and compose. In 1750, the year of his death, a lot of you might not know this, but Bach was blind. He was recognized as an eminent organist, harpsichordist, and conductor and teacher, but he was no means considered the greatest composer of his day. And I think that's an interesting thing when you think about all of his contributions. And unfortunately, he was largely forgotten and remained unpublished for years, even after his death. But we will see, as Beethoven comes about, as Mendelssohn comes about, and other composers, they will learn from this man. And really, there was no escaping the influence of Bach. So, what about him? We know about him and where he's been. Now, Dr. Muchnick, can you tell us why he's a genius? Why? And that's really difficult, because he's really a many-faceted composer, and there are a lot of reasons why he is a genius. And of course, the only way you can really know about his genius is to listen to his genius. First of all, he created all kinds of masterpieces except opera. Okay, and I want everybody to write that down. He created all masterpieces. All of his masterpieces are wonderful, except we don't have any opera from Bach. Maybe it was way too over-emotional for Lutherans at the time. I don't know, or it wasn't quite around there. But he did not compose any opera. What we're going to see with Bach is technical mastery. He was a craftsman. I said that about Palestrina. making lines of music relate to each other in an amazing way. That technical mastery, that stuff that's inside the composition that we're going to learn about. And then on the other side is emotional depth. What kind of emotional depth? Is it incredible lyricism? Yeah, every now and again, but also a lot of spiritual, emotional depth, if you will. His instrumental music includes pieces for orchestra, right? Chamber music, organ, clavichord, which is another forerunner to the piano, harpsichord, violin, and cello. The bulk of his output was written, however, mostly for the Lutheran Church. Bach drew on musical sources from many different places. His language was very international. And this is why. One of the ways Bach learned how to compose was to take a score. You guys know what a score is, right? That's the music. You're looking at the music. Take a score by Vivaldi, let's say the Four Seasons, okay? And he's looking at it right in front of him. And what Bach would do would be to revise it and change it. And that's how he would practice composing. He learned a lot from Vivaldi and a lot from Corelli, a lot from the Italians. And he also learned a lot from the French, the wonderful French dances, the courtly dances. So the Italians, the French, Germans, English, anybody he could learn from. And so that's how he learned. He scores. Remember I talked about the development of music printing? And of course he was able to see these scores. So he learned a lot from other people. So if you combine that international knowledge of what everybody else is doing and you combine his own genius, Bach, that's a good look into his style. We have a lot of rich harmonies. We have melodic lines of equal importance that occur at once, and that's where we're going to get these complexities. He used very complex and dissonant harmonies, people. We are really going way ahead of ourselves. The last time we saw, Vivaldi and things like that, this is a lot more radical, that's for sure. In Bach's time, there was little difference in style between secular music and sacred music. And in fact, he often created sacred music simply by rearranging instrumental pieces. You see? So that sacred and secular is really blurred with Mr. Bach. And now comes the point where I'm just going to let you dive into it and listen to it. One wonderful way to understand Bach's technical mastery is to go into the genre of the fugue, F-U-G-U-E, the fugue, the fugue. What is a fugue? Let's define it first. A fugue is either an independent composition or can also be a compositional technique. So when you go to a concert, you might see one of the great preludes and fugues, one of the 48. And you'll sit down and you'll see prelude and fugue in G minor. That's its own piece. Okay? We have a very wonderful prelude, which is very, very free, and then we have the fugue, which is very, very different. Okay? So, now, what happens with this? Okay? We're going to go back to independent composition and compositional technique after we learn about what a fugue is. First of all, a fugue to be a fugue has got to have two things: a subject and a countersubject. A subject and a countersubject. Another way to explain a fugue, and my colleagues get very upset when I do this, but I'm going to say it anyway, a sophisticated round. When you guys were on the school bus, right? When you guys were on the school bus, what did you sing? Mer, mer, what is it? Row, row, merrily we roll along. No! Row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. Merrily, 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 row, row, right? Everybody would come in at different times. A round. So let's call the fugue a sophisticated round, because as you listen to it, you'll say, oh yeah, I understand that. Heck with them out there. We know what we're talking about in this room, okay? So it can be an independent composition, a compositional technique. It's in its most simple terms, a sophisticated round, but it's got to contain a subject and a countersubject. Well, what is a subject and a countersubject? Let's call a subject a main theme, and let's call the countersubject a secondary theme, okay? But on the test, you guys better call it subject and countersubject. I'm making it a little easy on you, because it's a little not quite true here. Now, there's a graph for you. Subject 1. Subject 1 enters. Okay, that's the main theme. When subject 2 enters, you have the entrance of the countersubject. Okay, then subject 3, countersubject 2, subject 4, countersubject 3. Now, this all looks very, very complicated, but it's not at all. Because when you hear it, you'll go, oh, because that subject is always the same theme. So if you remember row, row, row your boat, you'll be able to pick it out. So subject 1, 2, 3, and 4 is the same theme. It might be at a different pitch level, but you will recognize it. You are all good at that by now, okay? If you could recognize organum the other day on the test, you can recognize this. All you have to do is listen, okay? Now, the countersubject's a little harder to hear. It's usually running a little bit faster, more accompanimental, in other words, okay? So we are going to listen to Fugue in C minor, okay, just the Fugue in C minor by J.S. Bach. Please listen to all of these entrances, and we will keep the graph up, okay, as you listen to it. So please at home, turn it on. That was J.S. Bach, and that was Fugue in C minor from the Well-Temper Clavier, written about 1722. Okay? And what he did with this is really quite amazing. And now, this was an independent piece called a fugue. Now, Mozart might, in the middle of the last movement of his 40th symphony, decide to break into a fugue, you see. So we could be in the middle of a movement of a symphony, and all of a sudden we have a fugue. And that is when it becomes a compositional technique, because you're in a symphony, but there's a fugue, okay? So then it becomes a compositional technique. So that's really interesting. But this guy was the master. Now, I will tell you also that you can play a fugue on the violin. 4 fingers playing 2 lines of music. And Bach wrote it. Bach is the hardest music for a string player there is to play, because you have to worry about a lot of things at once. He wrote a lot of solo music for strings, solo suites for cello, solo sonatas and partitas for violin. And so he did do this, and it is very complex, but you can have a 2-voice fugue, a 3-voice fugue, a 4-voice fugue, a 6-voice fugue. But how many voices do you have to have? 2, at least, okay? So that is the genre of the fugue. And now I think maybe this is very mathematical, but you can see this technical mastery. He was a master at it. Other people tried, and other people will do a great job. But boy, he really cornered the market on this genre, and it is very fascinating to listen to them. Okay? All right. Now, let's explore more of his genius, okay? We will go to the genre of the suite. The suite. Sometimes I see commercials around here that say, suite. Yes, you too can have a bedroom suite for $9.99. Mm-hmm. Nope, 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 nope. Suite. Suite. This was a very, very popular genre, not only with Mr. Bach, but also in many other countries as well. During the Renaissance, dances often came in pairs. A dignified dance in 4/4 meter or quadruple meter was often followed by a lively one in triple meter. In the Baroque period and later, music was written that, while meant for listening, not dancing, was related to specific types of dance music as far as tempo, meter, and rhythm. And of course, instrumental music has always been closely linked with dancing, and Baroque composers wrote suites, which are sets of dances. This is how you have to remember this genre, okay? Promise that a suite is a set of dances, and that's what's going to set it apart from other instrumental music you listen to. It is, certainly, they are dance-inspired. And they can be, here's where the Baroque period gets hard to deal with. Suites can be solo, meaning one cello, all alone, up on stage playing. Or they can be orchestral. Okay? So you can have a whole orchestra playing a suite, which is a set of dances, or you can have one cellist playing a suite, which is a set of dances. Okay? Now, where are these dances from? Remember, I told you that Bach was an international composer. We have dances from Germany, we have dances from Spain, we have dances from France, we have dances from England and Ireland. Suites were played in private homes, at court concerts, or as background music for dinner and outdoor activities. You know, and they really have an interesting, diverse past to them. And some of them, you will see, belong in aristocratic ballrooms, and some of them don't. So we have a wide variety of dances.